Hey everyone, welcome back to Make It Happen Mondays, where we talk about sales, business, entrepreneurship, personal growth, mental health, and everything in between with guests who I truly respect and I think make a positive impact on the world around us. Now, today's conversation is with Andreas Lares. Now, he is the managing partner at Shapiro Negotiations Institute and co-author of the book Persuade, the 4-step process to influence people and decisions. His expertise ranges from coaching live negotiations for sports clients like the Cleveland Browns, Brooklyn Nets, and more. And he's developed a ton of online content, and he's even a guest speaker at Johns Hopkins University and teaches the sports negotiation course. This conversation was a masterclass in negotiation. So if you are interested in upping your game on negotiations, you're going to want to listen to this one. We got into his 4-step process of building credibility, engaging emotions, demonstrating logic, and facilitating action. But more importantly, I validated a lot of the stuff that I trained on negotiations, quite frankly. I shared with him what we teach and how we teach it, and it was right in line with his mentality. So I was super curious to make sure I validated what I was doing, but also learn a lot from it as well. So hope you enjoy this conversation as much as I did. Let's make it happen. Andreas, welcome to the Make It Happen Monday podcast, my friend. How you doing?
Thank you. Doing well. How are you doing?
I'm doing well. Like we were talking, it was a little snafu this morning. Had to take my daughter to school in an Uber because I popped my tire, which is not exactly my finest moment. It was actually right next to my house too, so it's not even like there's a pothole or anything. It was my own dumb fault. But other than that, things are going great.
Well, pretty nice to be living in a day and age where you can call a taxi replacement on your phone and do it, right?
Yeah.
What would have happened 20 years ago? So at least you got that going for you.
Exactly. That's why there's a book called, I don't know if you've ever read the book by Matthew McConaughey. It's called Green Lights. And the whole
I have not.
Yeah, put it on your list, man. It's awesome. Matthew, unless you're like hate Matthew McConaughey, if you think he's
how
funny,
can you hate the guy?
That's my point. So he actually, this is why I recommend listening to it, because he talks. He's
the narrator. Oh yeah,
and it's his life story, and the whole concept is, he talks about all this shit that happens to him throughout his life that a lot of people would look at as red lights, like, oh, woe is me, I can't believe that happened. But in retrospect, it's a green light, because if that didn't happen, then he wouldn't be where he is today, type of thing. So the concept is, I used to say to people, and I wish I never said this because I now know how insensitive it is, which is, everything happens for a reason, right? I think that's bullshit, because, you tell the people in Ukraine or whatever it is, everything happens for a reason. Like, really? Okay. But I think if you look at it and say, if you look hard enough, there's a silver lining to almost every situation. That's, I think, a better way of looking at it. And that's what Green Lights is all about. So it's like, no matter how bad that thing happened, like, green light, maybe something came up because maybe I was supposed to, maybe I was going to get in an accident on the way to work, drop my daughter off, and I was in an Uber instead. So
I think it's that life is about the way you respond to things and how you see them more than anything, right? I mean,
exactly.
I think more and more I'll see people say, life is hard. That's just kind of a reality that maybe people weren't willing to say before. But the reality is, it is.
Yeah.
It's just how you respond, right? Everyone's going to have tough things happen to them, and so some are, I guess, as you said, go through it as a green light, and some as a red light. That's the difference.
Love it. So let's get into this. We're going to talk about negotiations for everybody listening today, because Andreas wrote a beautiful book on this, and that's what we're going to be talking about in detail, because I think negotiations now is more important than ever. But before we do that, Andreas, I always like to know the kind of your origin story here, not just your work story that everybody can look at on LinkedIn, even though I do have some questions, because it sounds like it looks like you're an Eagles fan, so that'll be fun. But talk to me like growing up, family, where you're coming from, and kind of where'd you get the itch to get into sales or business and those type of things. So give a little context here.
For sure. So, the name of this is Venezuelan. So obviously, it starts there. So I was born there. When I was young, we moved to Canada as a family. And then all the way to kind of to college, or is in Canada, it's called undergrad. So it's like process, and I've got to do some American translation here. And then I came down to grad school in the States. I went to Ohio University, and that's kind of how I got to the States, and I've been here ever since. So, it's been, a good almost 2 decades now here. And so hopefully you don't hear an accent anymore. But, and then as far as getting into sport, well, you brought up the Eagles. So, I came to the States for grad school. I wanted to work in sports. And so I think one of the best things that happened to me in grad school is I realized that working in sports, it's such a big field. So it isn't just working for teams. There's agencies, and there's teams, and there's organizations, and there's so much there. And so I happened to actually end up at Shapiro Negotiations about, 15 years ago. And so I worked here for about 7 years under the founder, which is the reason I came, a gentleman named Ron Shapiro, who was a very successful sports agent, lawyer, civil rights attorney, so we did a lot of things. And as he's the reason I came, and then about 7 years ago, as he was taking a step back, I took over with a partner, Jeff Cochran. And so now we've been running it for the last almost 8 years. So this was kind of accidental. I came for the sports piece, and the sports piece is still there. It's still very much part of our, kind of a evolution story and what we do. We still work in it. But the real growth has been in just, because if you think about it, it's kind of crazy to say this, but sports teams were actually pretty small. I mean, it sounds shocking to people, but they might be worth 2, 3, 4, 5 billion now. But as far as like large companies, if you look at like the Boeings and Googles and Sherwin-Williams, Bank of America's and PwC's, type of clients we work with, they're minuscule. So that's kind of where the real growth is. And so hopefully there's a hybrid permanently for us, because that's kind of the best case there for us.
So what aspect of negotiations did you get into with the sports side of the house? Was it like contract negotiations for like player contracts, or what? Like, walk me through like what aspect of negotiations was specific to the sports arena?
For sure. So, and that'll take us to the Eagles piece. So the Eagles piece, I was worked on the salary cap side and contract negotiation side. Okay. And I wouldn't say I was an Eagles fan before that, but I definitely, became a fan in the sense that some of the folks are still there. And so I was, I had 2 really incredible bosses while I was there. So one that's still there. And so I'm a quasi Eagles fan as a result.
You kind of have to be. Like, if you're not a fan of, like, I always tell people, like, you can't sell what you don't believe in, right? So,
exactly.
Like, if you didn't believe, if you hated the Eagles, it would have been a terrible job. So
exactly, would have been short-lived. Yeah. And so now, and that lingers because having it, I've been very fortunate to have pretty good bosses in my entire career, and hopefully some people can say the same about me out of them. But I would say those experiences, you realize how fortunate you are and how much of a difference that makes in your professional career. And so, that's kind of why I'm still a fan, if you will. But so that was the contract side, salary cap side, and that's kind of where it continued. And so when I came to S&I in the first place, it was for that. So really the focus was on helping teams in really I'd say 3 of the 4 major leagues. So it was a little bit less hockey, but basketball for sure, football and baseball, is helping teams negotiate player contracts. So that was kind of our focus. We did some trade work and some contract work. And then as time went on, we started to evolve on the sales side some, so sponsorship sales, especially some of the dollars. I mean, 15 years ago, they weren't anything what they are now. Like a jersey patch deals, a stadium rights deal, you're talking tens, hundreds of millions of dollars easily for some of these major leagues. And so they started to realize, hey, like what's 1, 2, 3, 5% more on these deals? It's easily worth getting some help. And so that's kind of the space that we opened up in. And so we still kind of play both of those. We do the player contract trade stuff, and we do the sponsorship side. That's kind of our main work on the sports side.
I'm just my own pure curiosity here. Do many of them negotiate their own contracts? Like, what percentage has shifted over the years of players who kind of, because one of my favorite players in football, American football, is Teddy Bruschi. And one of the reasons I love Teddy Bruschi is because he was a dedicated hometown kid. He was his own negotiator, like he negotiated his own stuff. Now, did he get taken advantage of? Probably, right? Could he have gotten a lot more? Maybe. And he only got an agent towards the end when he got injured, like when he got hurt, right? To negotiate a little bit better for him. So have you seen a shift? Like, does everybody have an agent now, or are there still people who don't? And is it a better or worse negotiation when somebody's representing themselves?
So yeah, there's a lot there. And I think, so it started with not a lot having agents because the dollars weren't there, right? So if you look at kind of the evolution of sports, no one had an agent. I mean, even before that, there wasn't even collective bargaining. So they had no power and they were basically getting screwed, right? So that's the beginning of sport. Then the dollars start to rise and people start to realize, hey, and actually our founder was really a big part of that. So baseball started to get agents. So he worked on, a lot of Hall of Famers early on, kind of the, 70s and 80s when that rise really occurred. And so the dollars started to come around. But his biggest deal early on was $1 million, to give you a sense of that. Like Eddie Murray got $1 million deal. I think he was the first deferred contract where any compensation was deferred. That was $1 million, right? That's 10 times less than the average player makes in the NBA now. I mean, just to put into perspective, like that's not, and he's a Hall of Fame player. But so that they started out, then everyone went to an agent. And then now there's a few that are, I would say there's still a very small percentage. And I think the reason is, if you think about an agent making, let's call it 2 to 5%, just for kind of generalization, And if you think about it, 2 or 5%, almost think of what I said earlier, can I help a team get more than 2 to 5% more? And the answer is easily yes. I'm really good at what I do. So the agent's the same. If you think about the role of the agent, there's a couple things actually so the biggest loss for me, and it's an agent in any space, real estate agent, sports agent, any agent of any type, having a lawyer in a negotiation when you're dealing with M&A, for example, it's that you can be kind of the good cop, bad cop. I don't mean in a tactical way. I mean, there's some things that are very difficult to say. I'm worth this much. And to say it is a difficult thing to say that with conviction, right? Not to mention, if you're an amazing athlete, that doesn't necessarily make you an amazing business person. It doesn't mean you're not. But those are really independent things. And so I think just the mere having an agent, a very good agent, in my opinion, and I'm on the other side now, we're a team, so I should be incentivized to say the opposite, can definitely make their money's worth and then some. Not to mention all the other services. If you think about the relationships they have with every GM, so they kind of know maybe ahead of time, they can be aware of some things that you would never know as a player. So I would say we're probably going to see some, but we're not going to see a lot more because I think people realize. I mean, the dollars at stake are really significant.
And if you get screwed, you get screwed. You know what I mean? And now you're stuck with something that you have to then deal with, whether it's the team, and then they can do whatever they want with you and move you wherever they want or whatever. It's kind of like real estate. Again, I always kind of used to shit on real estate agents. Now, don't get me wrong. Most real estate agents, I don't think are worth their shit. But the good ones, absolutely. Because I always had a problem with that from a negotiation standpoint, because I'm like, wait a minute, I'm trying to get a lower price for the house that I want to buy. And if I get a lower price, your commission is going to be less. And I train, like for me personally, I'm like, I train negotiations. So I'm going to pay you to negotiate for me with no incentive to get a better price. I'm like, I just did. But when they're the agent who actually knows the area, knows the details, like that type of, that's a totally different story. If they're coming with that, with knowledge of the market and what's going on and what's real and what's not to educate me, that's a totally different story. But almost every agent I've had from a real estate agent, I've just been like, what the fuck's the point here? Why are we having this? Like, why am I paying you? So it's interesting to see which ones kind of push. Because on that front, what attracted you to negotiations just in general? Like, what attracted you to, like, do you enjoy it? Did you kind of grow up as somebody who enjoyed negotiating as a kid? Like, how did you come to this as a profession for yourself, besides the fact that, you're just general evolution there? Was it something that attracted you?
So it's interesting because I think I wanted to be a general manager in sports. And so that's kind of the trajectory I went. I went to grad school. That was it. The Eagles, that was it. That was my track. And I thought the working for Ron here was going to be essentially kind of a step. And now we both kind of agreed. It was a stepping stone that I'd be here for a period of time where he needed some help with some deals they were negotiating. And I was, starting off basically supporting him. And what I realized is that it was kind of the two parts. And I enjoyed the negotiation component a lot more than I thought. Because even at grad school, it didn't exist as like, that's a job you could have. You're like, wait, what? So that's the first. And then the second was that this allowed me to work with a lot of different teams, different sports. And I realized I prefer that to the concept of working for one team. Now, some of the teams we work with, we've been doing for years, more than a decade. So I am as passionate as they are, and I feel as high or as low when they win and lose. But it's distributed across a bunch of leagues. And so to me, that's the piece that, that was most, so it was the combination of the two. And then I think part of it is I didn't feel necessarily that uncomfortable, but of course I came to learn from Ron, and I could have the whole session with you about some of the things that I learned, but a couple of the biggest ones are about listening. And so I think people think negotiators are these, smooth talkers and slick talkers, same as sales, right? Oh, salespeople are slick talkers. And you realize that's not what they are. And I hate to use the stereotype of the used car salesperson, but that kind of concept. But I think it's the exact opposite. Like, you get to a large, complex technical sale, it is not about that at all. It's about the simple things: being prepared, asking great questions, and proposing a solution that really has empathy for the other side, gives them some of what they want to make it work for both parties. It's a simple recipe, but very, very rarely followed. And so I think that's kind of what attracted me to it.
I love it. And what do you like most about, and we'll dig into some of the details here, but what do you like most about negotiations? And I ask that because my mentor, Jeff Hoffman, right? He's one of the best sales professionals I've ever come across in my entire life. He literally loves the negotiation. Like, he loves the game of it. He loves closing the deal. He loves kicking the shit out of his competition. You know what I mean? Those type of things. And it's always in the best interest of the client. Obviously, he's not trying to screw him at all. And he's doing it for the right, but he loves the game. Now, for me, I don't love the game of negotiations. I don't like the back and the forth. Like, I'm a super transparent negotiator. I'm like, look, this is how it makes sense. If it doesn't make sense, just tell me. Stop playing games here. Don't ghost me. I'll tell you what I can do and what I can't do. But I don't get off by negotiating. So for you, what is your favorite aspect of negotiations? And I probably we need to define what your definition of negotiations actually is to get there.
So, and I think, for negotiation and this, we start to have to kind of get into this a little bit because the two big things we focus on are negotiation and influencing. And so, where do you get to separate? Influencing, you're almost compelling someone to do something, versus negotiating is typically something that both parties want. So there's kind of a trade, whether it's dollars for a service, dollars for a product, or products for product, whatever it may be. And so I think for me, it's actually a little bit less about the actual negotiating component. More, my favorite part is the consulting others, like advising others on negotiations. Usually kind of the bigger ones. And the reason is it's less so being in the trenches but it's that people, like, you see these trends and it makes it super easy to have an impact on people just because you're a little bit kind of objective and outside of it. And so I'll give you an example. So I feel like 85% or more of the time that we're advising on large deals, the timeline, when I ask people, like, when do you think this negotiation is going to end? What's the timeline look like to you? Literally, at least 85% of the time, I will tell them, and in fact, the time will be 1, 2, 3, or like 2, 3, 4x longer. And so they think of it, we're almost ready here, John. We're about to get this done. We're about 2 weeks away, and I'm like, this is probably a month and a half away, and you're at least 3 or 4 back and forth. So what happens? That first step is, hey, you have to learn that negotiation is a process, not an event. That's the first piece, and people don't believe. Like, no, he's already said this is his best and final. Like, yeah, people say a lot of things. That's number one, and then the other is. That objective piece of it, to me, is kind of the enjoyable one, where that's where the experience comes in after 15 years, that you see some of these trends. They're not predictable, right? So I'm not, a prophet that says, oh, this is going to land here and there, but there's definitely some common threads. And so to be able to kind of impart those and to see the impact on people when they now change their strategy because you've been able to say, look, I know you think you're 1 move away, but you're actually 3. So I want you to think of that when you make your next move. And then when they counter, they're like, oh my gosh, thank God. And it isn't this amazing, incredible thing. It's just kind of seeing the common thread. So the advising of others for those ones is really kind of what wakes me up and I get excited about.
Like that. And I think that's the biggest misconception with especially young sales or young negotiators, if you will, is that it's an event. And I always tell reps, if you think negotiation starts with price, you've already lost. Like, negotiation literally starts from the minute you and I start having this conversation.
For sure.
I'm not talking the sleazy negotiation. It's a give-get process. So I'll actually, for context here, I'll give you kind of an outline of our negotiation training, and I'd love your perspective on it. Because ultimately, the way that we position it is negotiation about gives and gets, right? And the equality of those gives and gets. And the problem is most sales reps and our givers, right? We give, and we expect one very big get in return at the end. And by then, we've conditioned the prospect to keep treat us poorly and keep asking for shit, right? But on the flip side, if we get everything, but we don't give anything, that's usually when we're column fodder and we're, a vendor, they've already made their choice to go with somebody else, and we get happy ears and we wonder why they ghost us at the end. So we go through this process of outlining what are all the gives, what are all the things that your clients ask of you, right? They want information, they want discounts, they want proposals, they want all this stuff. And then we prioritize it. Easy to give away, hard to give away. So say there's 20 things on the list, 1 to 20. And we flip it over in the gets. Decision process, timeline, sign contract, that type of stuff. And then we prioritize that early to late. So now I got 1 to 20, 1 to 20, and then we match it up. So when somebody asks for 5, ask for 5 in return, 10 in return, right? And we score a deal. So we try to make it as objective as possible so you can kind of see the full list. And again, it's not perfect. It's not every single time. And it's not, you don't have to get all 20 and give all 20, but it's an objective view. Because I find negotiations a lot of times is wrapped in subjectivity, like your feelings about things and those type of things. So how do you try to make negotiations from your standpoint objective and try to remove the emotion out of it? What's your approach there?
Yeah, and I think a couple of things. First of all, I love that. I think what you just talked about, I think works. And I think probably the biggest impact is the process of doing that, of writing down all the things that you care about, that you want from them, kind of those gets, and then all the things that you think that they're going to want and value, or that you know that they want value because of what they've told you, just that process alone will already make you better. And just step one. And then the fact that you're making an objective or trying your best to, I mean, so certainly that's effective. And I think in line with some of the things that we do too. So I think that works really well. I think the biggest piece though is about, or one overarching piece about mindset too. And so we could talk about having Stockholm syndrome. And you said, that salespeople are often the givers. And of course they're kind of aiming to please, right? The idea is it's a bit like the agent that you talked about earlier for real estate. As if you think about it, okay, would I rather get this deal at 5% less margin than not get it at all? Okay, yes. 10%, 15%, what's that number? Now, of course, there's some number where they're saying, okay, no, or my boss is going to kill me if I do this. But, if you think with Stockholm syndrome, generally you're thinking, okay, I hear only, as you said, condition. I only hear if I'm selling to John, John's never going to say, oh man, that is a hell of a deal. I'm in. You really reasonably priced this. I appreciate that. You're much cheaper than the competitors I was looking at. You're never going to hear that. Even if you're literally by far the best value, they're going to say, John, I wish I could do it. I just need a little bit more. I need an extra free month. I need whatever. And so we get conditioned. But here's the crazy part that people don't realize, and it sounds like you're certainly addressing this too in yours, is what we do is we think we're doing John a favor. Say, John, you know what? I can give you that extra month. If we're thinking, man, we are really going to town, and John's going to love me for it. But what's actually happening is John's like, oh, okay, he's got an extra month to give. So what do you think is happening the next round, the next year when you renegotiate? It's no longer an extra month. Now it's 2 extra months because you gave me 1 extra month last time. And so it's incredible that we are complaining about the pressures we get from the other side, but we are actually conditioning that to occur even more. And so I think it's what you said really kind of hits home with what you see all the time. And so, because now we know that happens, then it's about managing expectations. The best negotiators manage expectations. And it goes back to what you said around, okay, so if these are the give and gets. I get the planning of that out. Then now you start making trades. Then the days of John asking for something without me getting something in return are over. And the moment that you think of negotiating that way, you're already, in the top quartile of negotiators by far.
So how do you avoid quid pro quo, though? Because I find that quid pro quo tends to get contentious, right? Where it's just like, I'll do this if. And we talk about a slight nuance of reciprocity, which is when somebody asks for something, there's kind of this, and I'm sure you've read Influence by Robert Cialdini. I don't know if have you read that book with, the whole...
It's the first book source in our book, Persuade. I mean, okay. He's...
Right. Yeah. So reciprocity, right? When somebody asks for something, there's that fleeting moment that they actually feel obligated to give you something in return. And if you ask for it right then and there, then you usually get it, right? So we try to work that. So it's like, hey, I'm thrilled to give you that. And the nuance is, look, I want to give you exactly what you're looking for. And in order for me to do that, this is what I need in return from you. Right. So it's like, what I'm asking from you is actually in your best interest to give me, so I can give you exactly what you're looking for. But then there's the need for quid pro quo, which is, look, I just can't sign that contract unless you're going to, I just can't give you that discount unless you're going to sign the contract. Right. So where do you stand on quid pro quo, which I think most negotiations is actually fundamentally trained on is quid pro quo. So what's your stance on that?
So I think some of it can't be avoided, but I'd say the best way to not necessarily get around that, but do it in a more strategic fashion is to be negotiating over more than one thing at a time. So if you think about the two things that happen is there's kind of a deal fatigue. If you're doing, okay, John, I can do this if you do that. And then you get to the next one, I can do this if you do that. And so when you got 15 points, like we're both tired and we just like, at some point I'm either going to walk away, you're done with it. And like, okay, I can't go to my boss 7 more times. It's just kind of a tiring experience. So instead, if you're thinking about, and certainly this would complement very well what you talked about having your list, their list. Okay, let's work through multiple items at a time. And so now you've got 2 or 3 rounds for 8 things rather than 8 rounds. And that also becomes strategic because I want to go back to something you said. When you're ranking yours and ranking theirs, right? The best negotiators, the focus is on, these are the 3 things that I value a lot that don't cost you very much. And these are the 3 things that you value a lot that don't cost me very much. And you're trading for those. And so now you're thinking strategically rather than the concept of quid pro quo often gets like line item number 2. And then, like, for example, you fought really hard and the thing that you got back isn't worth much. You only did it just to make sure you got something because you kind of felt like you needed to. And then when you take a step back, why did that happen? And so I think if you're negotiating over multiple things at one time, that can help less rounds, that can help be more strategic. And And that helps to align it, I think, in a way that there's going to be more value for both parties.
Do you put things in your quote contracts or whatever that aren't really that important to you that you know they're going to ask for and you're willing to give up just to kind of show a little bit of a give? Because I used to do that early, like as kind of like, for a dumb example here is, I used to put net 20 terms. So every, here in the net 30 terms, right? So I would put net 20 in there just because it would be something they would always redline, right? And I'd be like, well, hey, as a small business owner here, net 30 is really net 45. So I put net 20 in there so it's closer to net 30, blah, blah, blah. But I didn't give a shit. It was just to make sure that I gave, especially the contract negotiator stuff. But that was when I was younger and kind of playing games. So do you put those things purposely in contracts, for instance, knowing that you're okay with giving those things away?
So I don't, and actually a very similar kind of story to you. We had a couple that were like that. And I would say for me, I'm the one literally going out telling people that it's a process, not an event. But I'd say for us, we're very straight shooters in the sense that we've actually, I'll give you an example. So our contracts, we're working with companies that are much larger than us, right? Like Fortune 5,000 types. And we will structure the contract in a way it's fair and is actually as likely as possible to be accepted by the other party. And we will tell them up front is like for example, intellectual property protection and confidentiality for both sides are super strong. And the point is, I'm trying to make your life easier. So the approach is rather than and so that makes it so that when they say, oh, can you do this? That when I bring up the fact that the contract is very fair, they know. And even when they say it or not, like, I get you. And so that I think it also makes it a lot faster because for these are already especially some industries like pharma and aerospace, these are already massive MSA. And so do I want this thing to take 6 months to negotiate or a month? And so I think we kind of streamlined that, but I did start there because of that. Now I will say we do advise sometimes our clients, if they don't have a lot of things to negotiate, we might advise that, right? You only have 2 or 3 key negotiables and you're trying to grow the pie. Have a couple of other things that not ridiculous, but okay, are fringe benefits that, okay, you've got now, an extra 4th and 5th negotiable because that's the thing. You're only going negotiating over 1 or 2 things. It feels like a fixed pie, right? Like it's a pie that do you want 2 slices and I get 3 or you getting 3, I'm getting 2. And so then the problem is that it's hard to collaborate because it just feels like every dollar out of my pocket is going into yours. So to grow the pie, that's one of the things we will, on some occasions, do that.
Yeah, put some stuff in. So, yeah, I mean, and it always cracks me up. Like, it seems like legal and procurement don't understand because I remember like my first company, we did outsourced IT services to the SMB market, right? So not huge negotiations, but we dealt with people's infrastructure, right? So if we screwed something up, I could put you out of business. This was way back before cloud and everything else. So like servers on site, if I burned your server down, your business was over basically, right? So one day, like my CFO came to me with this 12-page MSA and I'm like, Calvin, what the fuck? I'm like, dude, like this is like $5,000, like $3,000 a month of IT. Like if I put that in front of their legal team, they're going to laugh me out of, and he was like, nope, we have to protect ourselves against all costs. And I tried to debate with him about this, but he was draconian about it. And I literally lost I had to lose 10 deals. Where I would have a great relationship with a client, everything was going good, got him to agree, and then I would give him this contract, and I would get emails back like, what the fuck is this? Like, I'm not even going to read this, because it wasn't just 12 pages. It was 12 pages in like 2 fonts, you know what I mean? And I'm like, can't we be reasonable here? Can't we just look at it and say, let's make this as easy as possible for them and just assume that they're not going to immediately negotiate with us and screw us out of stuff? Because I think I don't know why, but why do certain roles start so far, like anchor so far out? So like, why is that just an old school tactic or is it a mentality? Like, why do they start like, here's everything I want, and then, okay, I'll finally give up to this?
Yeah, exactly. You're like, wait, why did you not start more reasonably? So it's funny because I live this very similar. We had a bunch of different attorneys support us over the last 15, more 8 because our founder was a lawyer, so we didn't need it. But so what's interesting is when it's an outside of attorney that we worked with, and now we kind of have someone specifically focused on us. That was kind of the lesson learned. There's 2 parts. There was one that it was me not necessarily managing that role well, and the other side is the fact that their job is to protect themselves and protect us. And so I think if that's all they think about, then it kind of makes sense. And so they're giving you the laundry list of stuff. But what happens, we get these agreements back, and, a head of sales would get an agreement back with like 500 red lines. And this seems you, I cannot take this back to the client. We're going to lose the deal immediately. And so what happened is some of it was, I think, their way of thinking, and some just weren't a good fit. Like they were used to counsels for other deals where you could pull that kind of thing off. Or here, like if the negotiation cycle is 6 weeks, like there's a maximum number of things that you can put in. But then the second is I learned to manage those roles a lot better. Same as an agent. I mean, it brought up real estate agent in the beginning. So I have a real estate agent I love. We bought a bunch of properties with. And so I advise on the strategy of negotiation and he executes it. But like everything else, I trust him. He's incredible at comps and experience and all these things. But I'll make some tweaks, and he doesn't take it as an insulting thing. He other way around. If anything, he says he uses it then elsewhere when he negotiates for other clients. And I think the same with the attorney. It was actually I wasn't managing the attorney well in the sense that then we said, okay, I want you to give me the things that you're absolutely adamant we need to have, and then I want you to give me the things. So it's the absolutes, and then the nice to haves, and then the bonus. And then that way we could pick as a company, okay, there's 30 things that he's listed, but these 4 we need to have. These, 15 are really good to have. And then these are kind of, hey, if you care about any of these things, just be aware. And I think it was really about learning to manage it. And so a lot of it was actually on me and on us that, because that's the mentality you want. Because the thing is, you can't do the other. If the lawyer doesn't point it out, you're never going to be aware of it. And so I think it's their job to do it, but then you've got to kind of find a way to streamline that so it's reasonable. So it was a lesson learned for me, for sure. I certainly made mistakes along the way. And so, I think I've learned to manage it better.
Yeah. And it's also about, I think, when you involve them too, in the sense that to your point of lawyer's going to do what a lawyer's going to do. Procurement's going to do what procurement's going to do. Without context, they're going to cross every T, dot every I, cancel everything that's going to put them at risk. And that's why like so many sales reps are scared of procurement. Like I was early in my career. I'd be like, oh man, I'm going to develop a champion here internally so that my champion can beat up procurement, because I literally don't want to even talk to procurement because they scare the shit out of me because they negotiate better than me. But now I realize how important it is to actually include procurement earlier in the process, or, legal earlier in the process, to say, hey, let them be part of this so they understand it. Because, I mean, what would any of us do? Usually what happens is a VP of sales, VP of sales, and we negotiate, right? We go back and forth and we, okay, cool, we're going to do this. And then the VP of sales comes to the procurement, dumps a contract on their plate and says, hey, get this done by the end of the month. And the next day it's like, with no context, okay, red line. But it's like, hey, can we bring them in earlier? Can we, because once they can then become your advocate.
For sure.
Right? So
and I think it's the most under, that's like, so that we do some training in the pharma space, for example. That's the same as the gatekeeper. That the best reps in medical device and pharmaceuticals realize that is a really critical ally, and the same with procurement, right? And the best part is if you're the only one that does that gets them involved early, and your 3 other competitors are getting them involved last minute, who do you think procurement's going to more want to work with? And the reality is, and you said something earlier about, kind of emotions, and I think you cannot remove emotion from selling, from negotiating, nor should you, but you have to manage it. And you have to use it to your advantage. And so that's a perfect example. Does procurement person A want to be thrown something at the end and then kind of minimized and get this done immediately in lack of any empowerment whatsoever? Or do you want to work with them in advance, empower them in a genuine way? So then, okay, what are the things that are important to them? Can you find a way to structure it so you get a couple of wins for them? Because look, they're trying to look good in their role too. It's not just the VP of sales trying to hire the best sales trainer. It's also the procurement person that they've got to validate why they exist, and they have their own processes to follow. So do you want to find out those processes a month before, or when you've got 36 hours to get the deal done? So, I mean, it's funny because these things are so simple. But that's the thing. Early in your career, it's like, ooh, this is kind of scary. I'd rather my eternal champion deal with this than me. And the thing is, your eternal champion needs help. Otherwise, they may not get done.
Well, and also what people don't understand is that procurement is actually on the hook if they water down the contract so much that they don't get the value from that contract that they were expecting. So it's not like they just redline it and say, piss off, we got the best deal here. If they redline it so much that the overall value or the relationship is diminished from what was originally discussed, and therefore when they implement that solution, because of things that had to get taken out or whatever it might be, it ends up not being a good solution for the business. Procurement is actually on the hook for that just as much as the decision maker is, right?
Yep. And I think that's because look, these things don't happen in a vacuum. At the end of the day, the business leader, if they're really frustrated, you don't get the impact, then you go back and we removed X and Y from the scope because you want a 20% reduction in price, or we removed, any integrations with your technology because your IT didn't like it. Well, there's a consequence to that. And so being aware of that. And so I think, certainly starting earlier gives you the chance to do that. And actually, it's funny because I used to find the longer process super painful. But the reality is the other way around. Now we start them earlier and they're going to go a little longer, but we find we do not lose any agreements based on the contract now because there's enough time. So like when people say, I want training in 3 weeks, if it's a Fortune 500, that ain't happening. Because unless you can tell me that you're going to get this signed in 3 days. And so then now it's okay, great. Now, as long as you build enough timeline. But again, I think once we start, we are very confident that we're not going to get displaced because we can make some internal allies throughout, including procurement, including IT, the holistic thinking is the only way to do it, but it does require more prep. So then, because I think we both agree, obviously that's the way to go, but I think the reason it's not done is it requires more prep. You got to think about procurement, you got to think of your decision maker, you got to think of the other stakeholders, and you got to have a strategy for each of them. And so it's just a lot easier to just kind of push it through and hope. And so that's why it's not done. It just takes more effort.
And I think so many people these days are so transactional in nature that they're just trying to get the deal done, whatever it is, and they don't look at it as, hey, let's kind of holistically look at where we're at right now and what we're both trying to accomplish at this point, and look and educating. I mean, where are you with kind of challenger sale type of thing as far as lead versus follow, right? Whereas it's like, hey, this is like when things go well, because I've dealt with, that scorecard that we were talking about. One of the more interesting approaches that I saw a company, Symantec, as a matter of fact, use with that scorecard when early days when I was part of the company Basho, was they would outline every give get, right? And I'm talking like 50 or 60 in it, like a multi-million-dollar deal. And then they even went so far as to job costing each one. So they said, okay, well, this give is this role, and that's how much time it's going to take, and therefore X amount of dollars, right? And they would walk into situations and legitimately say, all right, Andres, here's the deal. We've mapped out kind of the buying and the selling process here. And here's all the things that you're typically going to want from us. Here's all the things that we're going to need from you. And here's all the people on your side that are going to be involved. And here's all the people on our side. And when things go well, it typically takes this, and this is what happens. And by the way, that's probably going to give or take cost you about 20, 30 grand just to help make this decision. And it's probably going to cost us 20 to 30 grand to help you make that decision. And that's when things go well, right? And I was sitting there, I'm like, holy shit. I don't know if I'd have the balls to walk into a client and say, hey, it's going to cost you about 20, 30 grand just to help make the decision with us. And by the way, that's when it goes well, and that's just with us. And if you want to triple that up with 3 other vendors, it's a $100,000 decision for you, right? I don't think I'd have the guts, at least earlier in my career, to do that. But and a lot of people would run away. Absolutely not. Oh my God, I have no interest in going through that, nor do we have the resources. But the ones that said yes, they were obviously in the driver's seat. So kind of where's your fit on, because you're an expert negotiator, do you bring that to the table with them to help educate them on it, or do you feel them out to see where they are on the sophistication scale?
Well, I think, I think it depends on, it's kind of like, do you go first or last? Are you the market leader or kind of a new start, right? So in their case, they're a market leader, right? And so with a market leader, they come with this credibility. And I think they further that brand of the credibility. They walk in, okay, John, here's everything you need to know, because they're almost educating the client. I've done this before, so let me tell you very real. And I think that is actually essentially a statement against self-interest. They're telling you the things you don't want to hear. So you're going to lose a bunch, the people that are ooh, I don't know. Now, you may lose temporarily even, right? Some of them may come back a month or two later once they talk to competitors and realize you were the only person that told me straight. So it definitely comes with some risk. But I think there's kind of, do you want to get rid of some of that's not ready? They're not real decision makers. They're not actually going to make a difference or change. They're your can fodder, all those things. And you're really getting kind of the sweet spot, if you will. So they can do that because they're a market leader. But if I was advising a startup, I don't think they could do that, right? Because who are you? And you don't have the credibility walking in. So you're not as likely to listen to them when they say this is what it is, because somebody's got, all the other brands to show for it. So I think it just depends on, kind of the amount of credibility you're coming in with. But I will say one of the things that I love in negotiations to do the work for them. And so when they do that, that's what they're doing. And not only are they telling it to you straight, but there's a transparency there, which is refreshing, and it makes it a lot easier to deal with. You talked about you being a straight shooter, so am I. And so if you get to another person that's like that, it's refreshing. And they know that, and there's trust immediately built. You're not screwing around here. You've done this before. Because here's the thing. We do a lot of professional services consulting, and it's a very simple recipe. I've got to have X margin, so I'm going to increase my rates by that much, and that's what you're going to get. So when the client starts to say, can you lower the price 20%? It's like, okay, it's simple math. Something will get cut out. So then you have to decide, do you want to cut out 20% of the scope or not? Because I've got my set margin. And so I will do whatever you want me to do. But that piece is an accordion. It'll adjust as you do. And so I think that transparency of like, you don't need to get into the person's business model, but it's pretty clear. I mean, that's it. It's just how much value do you want? You're the decision maker, and you tell me how big of a check you're going to write.
And that's, I think, the mistake a lot of sales, or I see a lot of sales reps make, is that they're afraid to present what the solution should be with all the different components included, like the onboarding and the training and the whatever, the long-term stuff, right? Because they're like, that's too expensive, right? But the beauty of doing that, like, hey, I'm doing this based off of what you told me your priorities were. Here's what it should look like. And then when somebody starts to beat up, instead of it's a dollar figure, to your point, you're then taking pieces away from them. It's like, yeah, well, okay, we can get to that price, but I have to take this and this and this, and that's out of this. And you had told me you'd wanted that. Well, we can't afford, none of those need to be in there. Well, then you have to pay for them. You know what I mean? Like, those aren't just free services here. So the idea of like bundling the whole real solution, even if you're scared to present it, gives you so much more leverage to negotiate on something other than price.
That's I love it, because you can't go up. You can't negotiate up. So that's how people negotiate against themselves. Like you said, they get there. So this is what they were at. They were at, $100,000 deal, and they pitched the $80,000 deal because they're afraid of pitching the $100,000 deal. Well, the 100 and the 80 are now gone because the 100 is never possible. The 80 is where you start, so you end up at 70. And so that's number one. And number two, though, is the best way to find out if someone cares about is you offer it, and then when you take it away, you find out, right? So you've got A, B, and C are included for 100K. And when you say, okay, well, I can get to 80, but now A's gone. No. Okay. Now, that is the only way to find out someone cares about it, right? Because they're going to tell you, we talked about the conditioning, no matter what, they're going to say, I don't care about that. Then you pull out A, like, whoa, I need A back. Oh, okay. Boom. Now I know A is actually valued. And so I think, being aware, again, that's the process, not the event. Because that first offer is never, it's very rarely going to be taken. Certainly not with procurement, IT, all the stakeholders involved. It's just going to end up being multiple iterations, and you got to be aware of that in advance.
Yeah, and it's so funny. I wrote a post a while back, like, stop negotiating with yourself, right? And in a real simple example, it always cracks me up. And again, I'm in this boat. I did it early in my career. I think a lot of reps, like, they don't have confidence because all they do is get beat up on price. And a lot of times they don't even know where the price comes from, especially in my space where it's SaaS. Like, SaaS is kind of like an extra license for an extra $100. Like, you really should, like, I know what the cost of that is, so it's free.
Yeah, marginal, it's 0.01.
Exactly. So, like, it's funny, it's like, say something's $100,000, right? Like the answer should be it's $100,000, and then you should shut the hell up and wait for the reaction from the client to say, "Holy shit, that's more expensive." But it's never $100,000. It's always, well, it's $100,000, but it depends on dirter. And it's like your prospect could have been here, talking to your competitors. They heard 150, 200, and they heard 100 from you, and they were like, "Holy shit, that's actually really reasonable." But literally, as soon as the word "but" comes out of your mouth, they ain't paying $100,000 for it. You just gave them a discount that they didn't even ask for. So how do you build the confidence in a rep who maybe walks into a company that's a SaaS company and, knows, like, doesn't really understand margins and that, and their CFO hasn't educated them on the background of where their pricing model came from, even if it matters, and they're constantly getting beat up on price? How do you build the confidence in that type of rep to build the confidence so that they don't have to negotiate with themselves?
And I think there's a couple of things there. The other one I love that an example of we just brought up is you also get like we're going to ask for 100,000, and like, okay, John, this is going to cost anywhere between 80 to 100,000. Then you finish the meeting, and I've been in those, like, I'm glad we asked for 100,000. Like, you did not ask for 100,000. You asked for 80 to 100,000, which means you're starting at 80, now you're going to end up at 70. And it's funny, but what's incredible is when you finish the meeting, if we're advising someone, they will, in their minds, like, well, we were at 100,000. I said 100,000, yeah, but you also said 80. And I don't think anyone's thinking 100 when you also said 80. And so one of our facilitators, my partner, says this in a way that's amusing that I think people will remember. So, for anyone listening, he says, that would be the equivalent of you going to a job, potential interview, and you get the job offer, but they're talking about, okay, well, this job pays between 80 and 100. And how many people are going to say, well, you better start me off at 80,000 because we're not sure if this is going to work out. And he tells that, and it's a very vivid way to think, well, then why would you think when you use a range like that, they're going to think the other way. So I think from a conference perspective, there's two big things. One's preparation and preparing for the negotiation. And I think a lot of people are inefficient in the way they prepare for the negotiations. What they think is that this means like you're going to have to spend 20 hours preparing. And it doesn't. It's just about having a process. That's the first thing. It's so simple, but if you do it between experience and doing it a few times and preparing, that's it. I mean, you literally do that, you'll get it. That's one. And then I think the second one is kind of preparing for those objections and having the concept of answers ready. So it's kind of the part two of preparing, how to. So you're gonna say 100, and I mean, I love the way you said it. Say 100 and just shut up, no but, no explanation. Keep your mouth shut. When they respond, as they will, because that's what they should do, and they say, it's too much, or I think I could get it less for a competitor, whatever they say, then you've thought about a couple of ways you could go. You got your A, B, C response, but now you're not kind of thinking on the fly, oh my gosh, how am I going to respond? Because look, the reality is you could come up with something very good, but the chances are, it's a coin flip. But if you've thought about it in advance, I'm going to 100, when they push back, where am I going to go? Am I going to go to, potentially, for example, okay, well, you said these things were important to you. Are they still important? Or, okay, well, what would you want to remove? Or now you've got your A, B, and C that you can go to. So then, of course, the confidence with which you say those things will be so much higher. You've almost had the conversation before you get there. So, there's a lot more to it, but I think those two are good, easy, practical that, anyone really, and then the third for leaders, I would say, is comping on that. So over the last 5 years in particular, I've seen so many of our clients go to a revenue and margin comp now for their sales teams. So it's kind of a comp, like a kicker for the margin. So, if you sell over $1 million, but if your average margin is more than X percent, you get, 2X or something. So you're really incentivized. There is one thing that's super important though, is you have to be willing to at least respect and support, possibly celebrate the walking away from the deal. So there's lots of companies that say, oh yeah, we want a minimum 20% margin. And then someone walks away at 18%. They're like, ooh, you couldn't get the deal done. Well, are you training people to get the deal done at any cost? Or are you training to get the deal done at the minimum 20% margin you set? And so that takes some guts from the leaders to be willing to do that, to celebrate, guys, John walked away at 15%. It's tough to walk away from it, but it'll be worth it because they'll come back eventually, or someone else will do it at 25 and make it worthwhile. And so are you actually celebrating those?
So I was going to end on that, like your kind of feedback or thoughts on walkaway lines, right? So, because my theory on this is we all have a walkaway line in our head. At some point in a negotiation, when you are getting beat up, it goes past the point of you feeling like it's fair. And fair, I think, I don't know, I'd love to get into the, Chris Voss stuff, fair is the 4-letter word in negotiations, whatever. But there is a subconscious, like, wait a minute, now I'm getting taken advantage of, or now I've done too much and you've gone too far. And then it's this self-fulfilling prophecy, right? Because then you start reacting poorly, you start not responding, and it just basically throws the thing down in the trash. And but it's also funny to me that, like, and I use Shark Tank as the easiest example. It's like people walk in going, all right, I'll give away 20% of my business for $200,000. Like, that's what I'm going to do, right? And then they walk out giving away 85% of their company for like $15. And they're like, what the fuck happened? It's like, you dipshit, you know that they're going to ask for more. Like, and you should walk in going, all right, well, for a normal VC, I'd give 20% for 200 G's, but because it's Shark Tank and Mark Cuban and all this other stuff, I'll go up to 30 for this and maybe another option here. But once it hits 31%, I'm out, right? So but that is hard when you say, like,
under pressure.
Right. Especially under pressure. But even with like 30%, okay? Because you hear it on Shark Tank all the time. Oh, what's another 1%? But what's your take on, no, our hard line is 30%. If it goes to 31, I'm out. Like, do you hold that hard, or is there a flex there that you try to come up with some type of compromise once it gets to that point? Because I've seen negotiations literally fall apart over one or two stupid things because somebody has dug their heels in so deep, even though that was their line. And I usually recommend you should have a line, because if you don't, it's going to get pushed by anyways. Yeah.
So, so much there. First of all, I have always had the idea that we should advise, and this should be part of Shark Tank. We should advise them when they have like 5 minutes to think about the deal, that we should be brought in to advise them before they go back to the shark. So you can give us a plug into Shark Tank, then this is my one if you got any connections there. But I think, and nothing get taken advantage of, but of course you've got sharks that do this for a living, And then you got folks now, again, some of them are very, they've sold, they exited multiple times. We're not talking about people who don't know what they're doing, but they don't have the same experience of 20 years investing in companies like this. But I think two things there. One is the walkaway line, we see this kind of a stop sign. So you have to have a walkaway line, because if you don't, you're just negotiating blind. But the stop sign, I think the key is you stop and you say, okay, is there a good reason, a compelling reason, or something that has changed that I'd go past it? So, for example, 30%'s it, and it takes literally 31% to get it done. Then if you take a stop, you really objectively, okay, well, 1%, is that going to be worth much? No, I would be willing to go 1%. But for example, that also makes you think, okay, well then, it doesn't just mean you accept 31. So, you 200,000 or 20%. Let's say that's 31%. Well, then ask for 250.
Right. Well, so that's
right. And so then, but then it gets you to a point where, okay, I'm not giving up on this because we crossed 30%. But I need to really take a step back for a second and make sure I'm aware there's a reason I said 30% early on. So that's one. And the one other thing I would say is I feel like every time we talk about a walkaway, which I love that you do, because most people don't. They're afraid. And to write it down, not just say it, not just think about it, but write it down so that you can refer back to that and be like, okay, there's a reason I said that. But every time you write a walkaway down, you should also write your highest goal. Because what happens is when you write a walkaway, you're going to end up there. If the only number, you literally have like a target set, and the only target is your walkaway, well, then psychologically, you're headed one direction. But if you also write down your highest goal, I'm going to start at 20% because I want to end up at 25%, but my walkaway is 35%. Well, because now you formulate 20 gives you a chance to get to the 25 that is your highest goal, your highest reasonable goal. And then, but that, then you've got to really have your ZOPA ready, your zone of, agreement there that you can negotiate over. And so again, now when you're in the heat of the moment, you're making decisions based on what things you've already thought about. So, if you're a Shark Tank, just like you should know your numbers, what's your cost of acquisition? You should not go without, because you're going to get ripped. If you haven't thought about kind of the willingness to negotiate, I think you're in major trouble.
That's what I don't, because what the biggest thing about Shark Tank that I recognize is 9 times out of 10, the person who is the product sell, whatever it is, they need the money. The sharks don't need that product. They could give a shit. You know what I mean? Cuban's a billionaire. He doesn't give a shit about socks and, like that type. So for him to walk away, he doesn't care. And money doesn't matter to him. So It blows me away that nobody could, because in that exact example, 20%, 200 G's. Okay, 30%. Well, or I'd be like, okay, well then $300,000, like $400,000. I'll give, because they care about the upside of the
exactly. They want the equity, because if 110 will make it really big, and that's a $10 million difference, a $50 million difference, not $30K or $50K up front.
They don't give a shit about that. So it's like you have to understand, going back to what's important to them. I know for a fact that money, like short-term money, is not important to any one of those sharks. Any one of them can write a check for $1 million without it literally even blinking an eye. But they're looking for the huge upside of this thing just turned into a $50 million, $100 million company where they can put $20 million in their pocket because of it. So that's why their percentage is more important than the cash outlay. And so if you don't understand that, and I watch Shark Tank incessantly to see, like, when are people going to fucking get it to, like, just ask for a little bit more equity.
They just need a real live advisor. That's all. But I would say the other interesting part about that is you can only do that if, and we have to do another episode on this, is because you got to know who's across the table from you. So you got 5 different sharks across the table, and each one of them will have a bit. I mean, they all are wealthy, they've all, but, for example, someone who, you got Lori, who is going to experience some way, she's thinking about a product that's going to be on TV. So your pitch should have that concept in mind if you want her. If you want, everyone's got theirs. And then I think the other piece is, if you want to be good at Shark Tank, in addition to obviously the product, but that is what the service, it's got to be what it be. But the people perform the best is it's the competition, right? So while they don't care about 27% versus 30 or, 300 grand or whatever as much, it's the competition. So the moment you got one could be with the other, and this is with anybody, it's kind of the winner's curse concept. If you will make, stupid decisions based on that, and not that you're looking for stupid decisions, but you certainly will get more, because what's the thing worth? The thing is worth as much as someone's willing to pay. And so if you understand that, and then these dynamics about what it's actually worth, what the last person paid, I don't care what you did in your first round, right? I care about what it's worth now. You've got 2 sharks, it's worth a hell of a lot more than you got one. It's so those kind of things, those dynamics, I think is critical in sales and then critical in negotiation.
Awesome, man. Like you said, I think there's probably about 5 different ways that we could continue to take this conversation. But in the interest of wrapping this up, you got a book out. It's I was going to get into those 4 steps, so I think we addressed them all the way through, right? Like the build credibility, engage emotions, demonstrate logic, and facilitate action. So this book, talk to people about what you're doing right now, how they can find out more information, and where you want to send them. Yeah.
So I mean, the book Persuade is. Has those 4 steps. It kind of walks through how people make decisions. I think for us, the Shapiro Negotiation Institute, that's the company that really, like I said, a 29-year-old firm founded by Ron Shapiro with kind of sports root, but now it's really kind of more corporate training and consulting. So I'd say take a look at our site, and we have a blog that we're kind of producing more and more content, I think, over the last few years. And so kind of a content machine in addition to the books. And yeah, don't be afraid to reach out. We cover a lot of the topics we covered today, and one of the things I appreciate about today is how much alignment, not surprising, how much alignment there is, right? I mean, it's at the end of the day, I think the more experience you have, you realize these trends that we've talked about all the way through. And so all you're doing is you're trying to kind of disseminate some of this experience that you've seen. And hopefully, if people take away 1 or 2 things from today, I think that's a win for sure.
Yeah, and I think this one was a super tactical one, so I appreciate that, because I was like getting into the weeds here, like theoretical. It's like, no. Here's some tactical things that you need to do right now to get better, and sharing the experience. I mean, you and I have been in the game for a little while. When I was 22, I had no fucking idea what I was doing when it came to negotiation. I was just, okay. So hopefully, some of this stuff can translate to some younger professionals who can maybe skip a few steps and not make as many mistakes as I know I have throughout the process. So. For sure.
And I think for the ones that are experienced with the discipline, I would say I always thought it was kind of the younger folks that we would train, but also the discipline for those that are more senior. And I think that means there's habits, lots of good ones, but also some bad ones. And I think being self-aware and reflect. I mean, I'm humble enough to, still make mistakes in negotiation, you know what I mean, and selling. So I think being aware of that, being humble enough to know that. And so I think hopefully there's some value for them too.
Awesome, Andres. Well, I appreciate this, man. And thanks for coming on. And let's stay in touch here. This is going to be a fun I think I'll be interested. I'm going to pick up the book and read the details. I kind of skimmed through it, but I think now that we have this conversation, I'm going to dive into some of the details and see what I can learn too here. So thanks, man.
Well, thanks for having me.
Absolutely. And everybody hopefully enjoy the conversation as much as I did. And like I always say at the end of all these podcasts, go out there and make somebody smile today, because no matter how bad your day is going or how bad you think it went, you go out there and make somebody smile, and you had a good day, and the world needs a lot more of that right now. So thank you all very much, and I will see you on the other side. Hey, everyone. I hope you enjoyed that conversation as much as I did. With your support and our incredible guests, we're one of the top sales podcasts out there right now, and I can't thank you enough. Now, to keep the momentum going, it would mean the world to me if you could go and leave a 5-star review on your favorite podcast platform and share some of your favorite episodes with your network. Also, I am super excited to be launching my new newsletter, where I'll be sharing everything I know and everything I'm learning along the way while I'm out there selling every day just like you. Go to jbarrows.com/newsletter to sign up today. Let's all level up and make this happen together.